You're listening to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I speak with trumpeter Dave Levy. Enjoy.
Mic check, 1 2 1 2.
Yo.
Yo. Mic check.
What's going on in there?
All right. How does my laptop mic sound? Good enough?
I think it's good enough. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
All right. Shout out to Apple. Shout out to the ghost of Steve Jobs for remaining to inhabit our devices like a hungry ghost.
You a big fan of Steve Jobs?
I'm a fan of people who can galvanize thought in a direction that leaves a legacy in general. You got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet, you know?
So what other examples are there of that?
I mean, galvanization on a large scale when it comes to, tech.
Like Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
Respect.
You know what? Yeah, it is hard to do. Anybody who's tried to, push a ethos a certain way or express an idea over a large swath of society, it's definitely not easy. We don't hear about the things that failed. There have been many failures that have left no legacy, and we don't hear about those. So hearing about those would actually lead us to respect the ones that do leave a legacy more.
For sure. Are you shooting for legacy? Is that important to you?
It has become more important as I've just rounded a birthday last week, 35, something I've been thinking about.
Oh, so it's kind of just started.
Yeah, just started.
Just starting in gestation?
Yeah, gestation. Yeah, well, honestly, things are moving so fast these days in terms of, recorded media. Mm-hmm. And the, frankly, degrading process of releasing music that I'm trying to figure out how I do want to make my mark, release music and release my imprint. Yeah.
So for me, as I got older, legacy became less and less important in the sense of just realizing how delicate narrative and reputation is, especially in the modern age of social media. I feel like, you could be behaving the exact same way for decades or making the same kind of work, and the way it's perceived is dramatically different. And so who knows what Steve Jobs will be viewed as in a century, and he obviously has no control over that. So I guess from a stoic perspective, it's like, I think it's something worth doing, trying to be ambitious and building something bigger than yourself. But I also think it requires some understanding that there's a lot outside your control in respect to that narrative.
Yeah, it seems like those who go for it in an ambitious way throughout history weren't too concerned about the legacy itself, because that's just bound to slow you down.
That's true.
I do seem to get along best with people that understand the highly relative nature of this meta element of judgment and legacy and cultural critique and whatnot. It's all very fungible. The Overton or, whatever you want to call it, it just needs to be accepted that it's probably the most fickle thing. You surrender to that which is fickle. But that's something I'm dealing with now is the sheer mountain that we're coming up against when it comes to our own contribution. Am I headed towards a more myopic preference of how I view my own work and my own output into the world? Like, should I care about legacy? Should I just go for it and learn to accept the results based on, just that out there?
Well, let's think it through. So what have you put out, as an individual? I'm not really certain of your path out after high school, which we went together for the listeners. That's how we know each other, is high school. But I don't really know what happened between high school and now, to be honest.
Yeah, a lot of what I do is play ephemeral trumpet notes I specialize in improvised music and more of like a groove, jazz rock fusion context. I play a lot of things that are gone in midair, that are there and have an impact, and then hopefully move some molecules, and then they tend to be gone unless the live gig was recorded. Live performance has been a priority for me. I've been on the road, off the road with some acts, big and small, and played a lot of events, a lot of gigs, a lot of horn section work around town. And I'm thinking a lot about the sea of recorded material that's out there, and if it's even worth contributing to that, in terms of how much time you put in, the efficiency of your process. I don't have a lot of recorded music out there. That's because of reckoning with the fact that through today's kind of monopolized channels of releasing music, it's a bit degrading to release music and go through that self-promotional process as an indie recording artist, to the point where I've actually put most of my chips in live. I
think that's going to be fruitful, because I think with AI, the saturation of that market's going to be so insane that live music's, I hope, going to become relevant in a much bigger way. So I think that could be a good thing. Yeah.
I'm glad that I came up in my 20s at the time I did. I kind of caught the last end of large label funded tours. Also government funded tours when, I remember, for example, when Justin Trudeau was elected, he earmarked about several $1 billion into Canadian acts, and a couple bands I was working with on a Canadian label. We had tour support, we had money. So I saw I learned a lot from the road, and I have seen, especially post Cove, I've seen touring budgets dwindle, and I've seen younger musicians not even get to experience a tour with some lubricant behind it. But that I too believe in the analog rebellion. I would like to believe that live music, at least for those a certain age and up who remember the old ways perhaps and still identify with it, I hope that the analog rebellion yields a larger investment in people trying to keep their soul together by experiencing, real people playing real music and getting people just want to get their molecules moved at the end of the day.
So you're big on the molecular scale, it seems.
Well, I figure we're 70% water at least. And you see the experiment.
I'll speak for yourself.
Yeah, I'm feeling a little gelatinous today myself. You look at some of the experiments, the resonance experiments they do on water, sand, other particulates, and you're like, okay, what's going on in the human body when you're checking out a dope sound system and you're getting your molecules moved in a live music situation? Mm-hmm. I do be thinking about the molecules when I'm playing on a bigger stage with a big resonant room sound system. How that actually, really? The imprint that actually leaves on people.
Yeah. Well, no, it's just interesting because it's a very materialist viewpoint, but then you mentioned soul. So I think part of the issue we're going to run into is like, if we don't have a literacy and respect to soul, there's definitely going to be a generation coming up that has zero idea of what they're missing. And they'll just obviously, I don't know how much they'll value just like actual human interaction and going to a live show.
Yeah, that's what I brought up, the age thing. Remember that book, The Giver by Lois Lowry? They had us read in a public school curriculum.
I didn't read it, but I please refresh my memory on that.
It's a basic concept, just in the near dystopian future of some sort. There's also a movie about it with Jeff Bridges, who is a interesting casting choice. But there's a certain sector of the elders in society who are strictly there to teach the old ways to the youth about what the old world used to look like. I think they live in some kind of Buckminster Fuller kind of geodesic bubble where everything is sort of projected for them. It would be my guess. And nobody actually touched nature. Nobody touched fresh air. It's all being piped in. Brave New World vibe, pretty much. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, that's why I brought up the age thing, because I do wonder, we can't be responsible for what happens when we're off this planet, but I do wonder what's going to happen for people who had no exposure to the old way of analog music making, actual sound voltages, wattages, vibrating speaker cones, in a space with other people's, electromagnetic fields and their vibes. So, everybody, I'm 25 and up, 30 and up, from now until we're off this planet, might remember the old ways. Beyond that, all bets are off.
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, actually, to come back to this idea of this is what you're thinking about when considering putting out an album.
This is what I'm thinking about when playing live. Sometimes
you're playing live,
and you play a show by rote, and you have a lot of time to think.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're in a theater pit, and you're sort of going through the motions, and you've played stuff many times. But what I think of releasing music is just the sea of material that's only going to get exponentially larger very soon, very quickly. So we have AI generated music that isn't terrible, to be honest with you. I'm going to give credit where it's due. And then we have people raised on like AI music making heuristics who are getting a perfect custom playlist tailored to them and their positive affirmations or something every day.
Yeah.
Completely irresistible. No, what I think about is when I'm releasing music mostly is the monopolization of the release channels and how degrading it can be to play their game with your hard-won, project.
So what do you mean by degrading? Let's get into the specifics of that degradation. like that?
Yeah, you might have to. Might be some experts, much more expertise on degradation than I have, but out there in some circles. But I think that the channels, the frivolity of the channels of distribution, and the sheer volume of stuff that's out there, in terms of streaming, let's start there. I guess don't do justice to what I feel that my capabilities are and my experience in the live music industry, to the point where I prefer to play live to an audience of. I like smaller club gigs. I can see everybody and see the reactions. Once you get over 400, you start to feel the bigger stage effect. But I would rather play, for example, doing a gig at a club called Hearsay on Thursday. I would rather play a modern house show with a live trumpet on it with a DJ for a crowd of 250, 300 than release my EP into the streaming ether for an unknown amount of streams. I prefer to put my chips in scenes where I know I'm going to be appreciated.
Mm-hmm. But how do you make a living?
Playing the trumpet. I get paid to blow into a piece of brass plumbing for a living.
Really? No, but so is that ultimately the concern, or is it just like you're pretty confident you could keep living from the live performance stuff? Is it more about trying to be heard and seen when it comes to recorded music or legacy, or is it just like you want to diversify your potential for actually financially succeeding?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm becoming increasing pragmatist.
Sure.
As the world gets highly fragmented, I'm trying to keep my eye on what's actually viable, and that becomes an art form in and of itself. An artist should stay abreast, I think, of all the potential channels of how to get seen and heard and what's resonant at that particular time. But I think that one other degrading thing is the sheer dismal royalty rates that these streaming channels have sequestered us into. And I'd honestly rather not play the game. I have enough shows. I have enough live performances. I prefer to play music for people rather than, release digital files in a, venture capital funded tech platform who, doesn't really do anything supremely innovative. They just happen to build the best, most attractive portal from the time that iTunes debuted to Spotify. It's right. Nice aesthetics. I don't really think they have much else going for them. They're also weaponized data companies, but that's another conversation. I'd rather right now, is at the age of 35, after doing a certain amount of touring and a lot of live playing and a lot of studio recording work. I have a pretty substantial discography of work that is not under my own name, and seeing pretty dismal royalty payouts for that. I didn't catch the the golden era for that, unfortunately. You could say a post Napster era, but yeah, I'm not really that keen on until something new happens. And Bandcamp is a nice platform, but it's just not getting the listener base that we need. Until we find a more direct payment model for musicians than the streaming 0.0007 pennies on the stream, I'd rather not play the game. So Leaving a Legacy, to answer your original question, Leaving a Legacy doesn't come into play for me in that realm. It's starting to come into play in terms of family, but
sure.
Not so much leaving a recorded body of work based as juxtaposed upon how terrible the way that people, how frivolous the way that people consume music. I'd rather not play the game. So I'm a pragmatist, actually deciding right now whether to stack my chips in the live performance, or not play the streaming game and waiting. I'm waiting for what's next, as well as fairly interested in building in the live space in some form with other entrepreneurs.
Well, I also assume that there's a natural tension between jazz and recorded music, no?
Yeah, the improviser does have a strange relationship with, encapsulating their music on recorded media. It's best captured live. Jazz is best in a small basement dive, somewhere in the West Village. Recorded jazz has done well in the past. It seems like it got frozen to some extent. A lot of people claim that jazz died in 1959 after Kinda Blue came out. It peaked and then it fractured, and then we have many things that aren't jazz that have been called jazz. So let's get so for me, don't talk to me like I know about jazz, because frankly I don't know about jazz. So you can talk to me like I don't know anything about it. Because I don't know, I've never been able to connect with it, and maybe because I almost become a cartoon character when I hear it. Like I feel like there's like a cliche and an image that comes to my mind of like how I should listen to jazz, and that there's like this layer between me and the music often. But I'm kind of curious what it means to be a jazz musician in general, if it did end in 1959, etc. Like if you could give me a brief walkthrough of the history. Yeah, well, I feel the same way. I mean, that harkens back to your original point about relativism in the way in which culture is judged by every different consumer and producer. Are we at the mercy of cultural instances where jazz is used and how we perceive it? For example, you hear Dixieland, you think of Steamboat Willie, you think of if you hear a certain type of Louis Armstrong, if you're a certain type of cool jazz, you think of a 60s Hep Cat in the conversation pit, snapping along with the horn rim glasses. If you hear Dave Brubeck, we are, I think, at the mercy of ways that the music has been appropriated, for better or for worse. I don't put any weight behind the word appropriation other than its literal definition, but the way that it has been a bit of a caricature of itself as we've gone through many generations, that the music has been removed from its original cultural context.
Is there any reason why it feels so, and I might have a theory here, but like, why does it feel so amplified in this instance? Is it because it started off as a very genuine thing and then ended up naturally where everything else ends up, which is just like music? Just like the way that graffiti in an art gallery is very embarrassing. Is it just the contrast that makes jazz stand out, to me at least, in this kind of cartoonish way? Or is there something else going on?
Well, it really depends on what kind of jazz you're talking about. A lot of people have problems with that word, the origins of that word culturally to begin with. A lot of people, there's a lot of movements going on in East Coast jazz right now to, in fact, divest from that term completely because of the counterproductive cultural connotations that it carries. The word jazz, I mean, well, first of all, to answer your question, I think that one theory would be jazz formed, if you listen to ragtime, you listen to rags, it was music that didn't take itself too seriously. If you listen to a calliope steamboat organ on a steamboat, recreational steamboat going down the Mississippi River in New Orleans that Louis Armstrong was playing on, didn't take itself too seriously. Armstrong was a hard partying, dignified, but fun loving, pot smoking, dirty joke slinging, if you read his biography, parable telling, down home gentleman. He's often credited with inventing modern jazz, left his imprint on hip hop and whatnot. But yeah, it's music just like graffiti. It was a direct ear to the tracks of the streets, and it did not take itself too seriously. So maybe our propensity to over academicize things through that lens, maybe we unfairly apply that to things that are completely unpretentious.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems funny, right? There's always like this. It's either the most pretentious thing going on or the least. It seems.
Yes.
It embodies a very extreme position, and also I would agree that like when someone says jazz, I don't. Besides the cartoon notion I was speaking about earlier, I really don't even know what that means. That if it's a form or a medium, in the sense of, is it just being improv oriented at this point, or I mean, I guess it's a tough thing to kind of even elaborate on, honestly.
That's the beauty of it. I mean, jazz is a moving target, and that's kind of the point.
But are you a jazz musician? I'm
jazz adjacent. I'm jazz informed, but I'm just an improvising musician. I'm addicted to improvisation. I tend to be more adjacent to groove, R&B, soul, and hip hop circles in what I do on the day to day. One of my main MOs is to be accessible and to help people digest slightly more colorful harmony and rhythm in a way that doesn't seem intimidating. Jazz can be very alienating. I mean, there's free jazz. Is the average person, 99% of people, gonna think objectively that the Sun Ra Orchestra sounds pleasant in a way that would bring them joy or relaxation to the quality the average non-musician seeks to when they listen to music to change their spirit? I don't think it's going to sound pleasant to them, and in a way, forcing that on people is just going to ruin the perception of jazz. And then there's Dixieland, there's finger snapping flapper jazz, there's Boardwalk Empire, there's Miles Davis cool jazz, which I think is the pinnacle of accessible jazz, and that's as evidenced by that's the best-selling jazz record of all time. Certain jazz feels effortless. I can give you an example, and sometimes I'm down at a jazz dive in the West Village, like Smalls or Fat Cat or Cellar Dog or Zinc Bar, and all of a sudden you're hearing some of the hardest Coltrane-inspired swing music, but people will like misappropriate a certain judgment upon jazz. There's a certain type of person who'll come down finger snapping and flapper dancing to what I consider this hardcore jazz that was protest music of the civil rights era, for example. And I find that example extremely infuriating when that happens, because they hear the swing. People non-musicians tend to zone in on very specific shit. They hear swing, and they don't hear the blues influence. They don't hear the context of the struggle in Mississippi Delta. They don't hear the harmony. They just think that, for example, 60s Coltrane, the stuff that's going into outer space, has something in common with, the music that flappers were dancing to in 1931. Mm-hmm. And that's just funny to me, because it's so off base, but you can also learn a lot about how people hear music from seeing shit like that.
Sure. I mean, it also strikes me as, there's this idea that exists in jazz that I don't think you find often in other music mediums, which is, if you don't like this album, it's because you're an idiot, or because you have not been educated enough to understand it. And I think this position exists in modern art often, and is usually wrong, although there are rare instances in which I think it's accurate and correct. Do you think, is that fair to say that there's this kind of, it's like I don't like the taste of coffee, right? And I always thought it was funny that you could just go, well, it's an acquired taste. It's like, oh, it does actually taste like like dirty bean water in reality. But if you get addicted to it, you'll think it's good, or alcohol for that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Where do you lie? Like, because what you're talking about is like a lack of education in some sense, right? I actually think that miscommunication culturally is often interesting, but I also understand why it's infuriating in that instance.
yeah. Yeah. That particular instance is such a off base perception of the music, but I also will never blame somebody for their particular frame of reference. I think about frames of reference a lot. Clearly you do. Matters of the meta when it comes to art and culture, which is the space I try to, live in most of the time. But it's the most interesting to me. I think that jazz elitism does exist, and why I don't think we have time to go into the entire ifs, ands, or buts. We can blame academia. We can blame first and foremost. I would blame the educational industrial complex for creating the feeling of elitism, so that more money could be made in teaching it.
Sure. But it can only attach to certain things, it seems to me. For instance, like conceptual art is very fertile soil for this kind of elitism. But, really representational figurative painting or cartoons aren't, because they are really clearly communicating a certain kind of value. And by that I mean a visual value, and it's more human and innate. It's not as intellectualized. So is there something about jazz that is it so fringe? Is it so expansive and experimental that one must be educated to grasp it, in a sense?
No, I don't think you need to be educated to grasp jazz. I see it having a resurgence right now in Bushwick, under the J Train. There's amazing bebop, post bop clubs, and I see a lot of extremely diverse intersectional people, because of how well these clubs are placed, entering the spot and immediately digging it. I think people do intrinsically understand it. Jazz is rhythm, but it's best appreciated. I think jazz is best conveyed in a small club environment. It's also after the LP went out of style, I think the CD and digital presented unlimited, recording time. I think jazz got really lofty and long and stretched out, and it just exceeded its welcome in terms of attention. So
yeah, it's interesting to have those physical limitations that are like an artist doesn't really want to think about, or they don't like the constraints often, especially if they're a bad artist. They often are really necessary, and they're not intentional per se. For instance, an artist didn't create that limitation, but a lot of great work comes from that.
Yeah. It's super interesting. I feel heartened by the fact there is a resurgence right now. A lot of stuff going on downtown. I see Smalls Jazz Club on West 10th and 7th is packed every night, with a mixture of tourists, of young people. The jazz culture is alive in the underground in New York right now, despite certain real estate woes. Once people enter, they become, even for one night, they can become jazz fans for life. And I see it happen every time I'm there. They feel the power of the drum solo. They feel the wail of the trumpet right in their face. It needs to be direct to the streets, to the point. Solos need to have shape. Solos need to have a narrative. And there needs to be, here's the number one thing that I notice that people appreciate who aren't musicians, is on a meta level, is not even the musical content itself. It's the fact that the musicians are interacting and showing passion, conveying energy, and having fun, smiling. There's a time when jazz was so institutionalized and seeking donorship. The 80s was not good on jazz. And things, if you look at the rise of Jazz Lincoln Center and the Young Lions era, jazz became institutionalized in a way that it required a donorship class. You still see it, remnants of it today. Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola up on 59th Street just dropped the Coca-Cola like 3 years ago, being sponsored by Coke. Somehow they managed to get that funding together. You still see a gold, silver, bronze donorship tree when you walk into the Rose Hall at Lincoln Center, which is a remnant of the 90s. But I must say I'm heartened by the fact that a lot of very fashion-forward, PR-minded, socially conscious entrepreneurs, first and foremost entrepreneurs, are taking the music to the streets right now, self-promoting, documenting, taking it to Europe, taking it to Japan. The scene is very strong right now, and that's because people have started to remember again, especially in the absence of labels, as people are favoring going independent more and more, that jazz is inseparable, or music is inseparable from fashion, culture, and matters of social progress.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So you, in some sense, were very fortunate to. I mean, I find that in your 30s, early 30s, you start to develop a certain level of mastery over whatever craft one starts in their teens. So it sounds like you were positioned very well.
I'm glad that we were born at the time we were, for one. I'm glad I existed in North Jersey. A lot of great instrumentalists out here in the vicinity of New York. Great musicians, a lot of great youth programs, great teachers. I was lucky enough to have my youth trumpet teacher was a very fine man by the name of Steve Badalamenti, true Bay Ridge, Brooklyn original. A lot of people know the Badalamenti name because of Angelo, who is the David Lynch composer, infamous Twin Peaks. He passed away not more than a few months ago. So, I had these warm old Italian souls in my life teaching me to love music first and foremost and love the instrument. True Bay Ridge, Brooklyn originals from the Brooklyn Dodger days. And he was out in Jersey teaching and retired. But
what age did you first pick up?
Public school age, 9 or 10. And then I had a teacher by 12, and he would take me around. We would go around to these old man Italian big bands in Paterson, New Jersey. There was a union in Newark. We would go play these Italian feasts. We would go play big bands, Count Basie, Sinatra. So I was always very, very keen on, by happenstance and now intentionally keen on being very intersectional with my music and my instrument and my improvisations, and trying to reach certain intersections. From being a 14-year-old and playing in a trumpet section with 95-year-olds, which happened a lot. A lot of colorful characters in North Jersey. And then moving to the city, my first tour out of college was with Richie Blackmore from Deep Purple in a Renaissance rock band. They're huge in Germany, as well as, Czech Republic, and they do, Baroque-inspired rock music with Richie at the helm. Then I worked with Nora Jones, and she would be considered jazz, but is absolutely everything else. She's a very intersectional musician, country, down home Texas stuff, pop, rock, rockabilly, jazz, capital J jazz. I was working with various roots rock bands like Alberta Cross and Valerie June, and folk music, Memphis blues. I like to put the trumpet in odd circumstances, unusual circumstances, and see how it works. A lot of the time nowadays, I prefer to play jazz fusion, like hard-hitting, African rhythm-driven, electronic, improvised music. But that is to say that jazz is a moving target, and I think the term jazz. Do you know how the term jazz came to be?
No, I do not.
Well, some say that it was jazz back in the early days of New Orleans, to say like turn of the century, from somewhere between 1880 and 1910. Jazz was played in the whorehouses. So some say,
what the hell is jazz?
Jazz was what it was called before they made it Z's. It was spelled Jass. Some say
is there a root etymology to jazz?
What I've read is that some people say that the whorehouses were scented with jasmine.
Okay.
So
sure.
They called it jazz music. Some say that it was called jackass music by more stuck up, erudite academics. That it was called jackass, which was shortened to jazz, J-ass. But the origins were not highfalutin, and I think that's still where acoustic horn, drum, and piano driven music is. You can separate the idea of improvisation from jazz completely.
Okay.
If you wanted to, as independent factors, but you can't separate jazz itself from improvisation. Because jazz is improvisation from a certain Black American cultural context that originated in New Orleans, which originated from the Delta blues, from the slave trade, from the juxtaposition of African music, rhythmic traditions, and work songs upon the American South. So I would say that when it comes to capital J jazz, there's a movement right now in jazz. It's started by a very socially active trumpet player named Nicholas Payton. He literally spells jazz J asterisk asterisk asterisk. Jazz is a 4-letter word, as he would say. So there's a movement just to rename jazz Black American music, or hashtag BAM. In fact, to the extent that Tulane University, New Orleans, has a Black American music master's degree. They don't even call it jazz anymore. So
that's a shame. Jazz is a cool word, and all those other alternatives
but
are pretty stupid sounding, honestly.
Yeah,
but jazz, there's something about jazz actually that I think is descriptive of what's going on. And I like that. You don't see that double Z too often. I mean, I know it exists, but often it is, I don't know. I think I'm for the jazz. I'm for the word, aesthetically speaking.
Yeah, sure. Razzmatazz.
You got razzmatazz, yeah.
Yeah, product of a certain time, product of 20s, 30s, American exceptionalism, grandiose times, wild party times, temperance bucking times, speakeasy times. Read the biography of Duke Ellington or Louis Armstrong or Fats Waller, throwing rent parties in Harlem that were absolute anathema to like polite white society. But they were having objectively probably the most fun of anyone in the world at that particular time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to, so when you pick up the trumpet, is it very obvious that this is your instrument and this is what you want to do for the rest of your life? Or did it take time?
Well, trumpet's hard. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it gives you a migraine. So, I have reckoned with the fact, as well as every trumpet player has come up with a lip injury that has threatened our career. I don't know any trumpet player who hasn't. So no, it has occurred to me that this instrument is not necessarily the end all be all of my involvement in music.
Right. But what about that first moment or those first moments with this particular instrument? My assumption is everyone wants to be like a drummer or a guitarist. So did you toy around with that stuff, or was it immediate, this connection with the trumpet? My
first instrument was drums. And keys. I had early drum stuff around from a very young age. My parents are musical. They were always singing. I come from a long line of Moroccan liturgical cantorship.
Excuse me?
I come from a long line of like Moroccan vocal musicians from like the Judeo Sephardic tradition.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so
that's really cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. My dad was born in Casablanca, came here in the 70s, and all the way back there was stories of musical like leadership. I kind of like a griot, they call it in certain traditions, or like a musical community leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So and my whole family's musical. It's definitely, but the trumpet itself, I as far as I remember, it always felt natural. I guess I was lucky enough to develop a good embouchure and a good feel for it.
What the hell's that?
Embouchure is the French word embouchure, of how one places their mouth on a wind instrument.
Really?
Yeah.
So how do you place your mouth on a wind instrument?
Well, it'd be different. There's embouchures for the woodwinds, for the reed instruments, for oboe, saxes, clarinets, trumpets, trombones, all considered embouchures, but all very different. Trumpet's still a physical phenomenon. Brass,
sure.
It's a standing wave in a bunch of pipes and excites the metal, and it creates a brash, loud, focused tone. And you're putting energy through a piece of plumbing, and it rewards you with a good sound. But you got to have your lips together. You got to have your muscles strong. You got to stay conditioned. It's a constant struggle.
So your parents were supportive, and I don't mean that in like a very active way, but I find that, because I think good parenting honestly is not that active, but there's nothing abnormal about you wanting to be a trumpet player.
Absolutely. To their credit, they never questioned the idea of professional musicianship. I never had a backup plan, which I believe in as an ethos. And
you do believe in?
I believe in having no backup plan if you really want to do
Okay.
it.
Sure.
But yeah, they never questioned it. It was normal in our house. And while they weren't professionals, I think amazingly the idea of like pragmatism never came up. It was like make the best music you can with the best people. And to their credit, it led me to never questioning it as a viable option myself.
Yeah, that is fascinating, actually. Like maybe the pragmatism should develop naturally over time as the individual weathers certain storms and is like, okay, maybe now I have to face and reckon with this reality. But as a young child, perhaps it's maybe hardens them too early to be considering how to commodify or monetize this thing they love.
Absolutely. Yep. It never came. My MO was always just to play the music that resonated best, the best music I could with the best people, and play my instrument well. And that was always my North Star. And we all get more pragmatic as we get older, quite possibly. But, mainly as a result of the economy being extremely fragmented, unpredictable, and tough.
Well, we also take on responsibilities beyond ourselves often. And thus there's almost a moral implication to being impractical, in the sense of if you need to earn money to support a family or something, it's only logical you would have to start to be a little more based in reality, I think.
Yeah, based. Stay based. Literally. So I've always actually felt prideful of the and fulfilled by the challenge of doing the extremely irrational thing of making a living putting air through a piece of metal.
Sure. Yeah, it's very, very fortunate.
It's been a great challenge, and somehow, I like to leave positive vibration. I like to leave a venue or anywhere in the world that music is happening better than when I found it.
Yeah. Yeah, so part of me with musicians is always curious. Like with art, there's like this clearer division, I think, sometimes between a fine artist and a designer doing commercial work where they work for clients, fine artists supposedly simply expressing themselves and then, often going through institutions, museums, etc., but with quote unquote more integrity. But with musicians, it's always interesting to me, like, I've interviewed several and sometimes there's people who do put out their own work. And then there's people who are mostly working in the background on certain things. And it's always fascinating to me to understand the what would you say, the diet of what they need. Like, do they need 50% of their time to put out their own albums and then they produce things on the side, etc.? So for you, it sounds like most of the time you've been working in the background. Are you now desiring to... I know it's complicated with the recorded music like we discussed earlier, but are you desiring to be seen as an individual artist more and more?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is, Mike, there is a expectation placed on horn players and soloists to sort of step out as a leader. In my world, more so than there is for maybe rhythm players. While I have been behind the scenes in mainstream music so far, I do feel the call of the Galapagos to kind of step out and as a leader under my own name. But at the same time, I do love being in a band. I love the collective environment. I've been in bands, many great bands, and they are hard to facilitate democratically. But I do love I love a musical collective. Especially compositionally, where everybody's writing and bringing in tunes, and we all have skin in the game as kind of a business. But there are absolutely no one size fits all approach. But there's absolutely benefits in my experience to having eggs in every single basket and not discriminating. Now, some people think a more specialist approach. What I notice in my sector is that you can't not do everything. So session work is great. A lot of recording work for hire. It's nice to get paid to record trumpet in your underwear in your home studio and arrange brass section stuff and horn sections. There's the live basket. and there's the teaching basket, some semi-involved in education, and then there's people taking on influencer stuff, getting pretty meta with it, releasing educational materials, teaching other musicians how to be entrepreneurs, younger musicians. So it's truly a multifaceted approach, and I genuinely have been lucky to like a lot of things. So I tend to embrace a large diversity of projects.
So does it matter to you, for instance, like to have the ability to express who Dave Levy is as an individual via some kind of musical project, or is that way of thinking really unimportant?
Yeah, to be honest, I actually prefer to work under aliases.
Okay.
I've never felt diminished by working under a band name that wasn't my own given birth name. I do feel the urge to step out, but I'm much more validated by how the actual performance goes, or the vibe that we have in the studio when the joy of creating something, than what the metadata is when you're releasing a song on a streaming platform.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, there is a certain expectation, and I have felt this naturally, independent of what the market dictates you should do. There is an expectation for horn players and instrumentalists to step out and hire. I'm kind of past being in a collective, being in a band, a democratic band, sort of like operation. That ship has sailed for me. As much as I love it, I really do like being in a band with my friends. But there is a time when you put enough time in as a professional, you're sort of expected to be a leader, and then the people you're working with are also becoming leaders at this age. So right. You de facto step out, write your own compositions, and hire a band behind you of usually younger musicians, because everybody your age who you came up with, if they're still in the game by 35, they're probably about ready to step out as a leader also, for both ego reasons, market reasons.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the question for me comes from the place of, I think I'm always trying to understand who the individual is and what they bring to the table, visually or musically or whatever they may do. And so it's interesting for me to understand, what are your strengths and why would someone pick you specifically to produce something or to be involved with a certain project? In other words, what do you think you're best at, in the sense of, were you given raw natural talent? Do you work hard? And do you have a style? Like, how would you distill all that information down?
Yeah, all of that. My specialty, paradoxically, my specialty is not specializing.
Okay, sure.
My like, if I was a Smash character in Smash Brothers, I would be, like Mario, or I would be, Ice Climbers. I think that I'm hard to pin down, and my specialty is knowing a lot of music and being adaptable to a lot of different scenes. Like I told you about some of that diverse touring experience before. I happen to love a lot of different kinds of music, and I'm capricious in that way. So that has led me to desire and be okay and thrive on playing in a variety of contexts as a freelancer. Now, the goal as a freelancer is to have enough work coming in that you can pick and choose your favorite stuff, but some sort of average of that process creates your career. And as a freelancer, and then independent of that, there's the stuff you do as a solo musician to step out. But it's hard work. It's learning your instrument. It's putting in that monastic time in college to develop like raw chops, and being in the practice room 4 to 6 hours. I don't have nearly that much time anymore to practice or desire. But you need baseline technical skills as much as you need to express yourself without restriction. And you need good friends. You need inspiration. You need social context. That's why so many musicians live around cities. You need a canvas on which to project your sounds. And, I had a few advantages. I was born with perfect pitch. My mom has it, maybe hereditary. Come from a musical family. I come from a geographic location that had great teachers, great youth music programs, a scene near the city. Been cruising in the city since I was 15 or 16. So it's all that, I'm grateful to be existing in the context that I do. And then on the intersection of that and hard work, somehow in the summation of that is a career as a freelance trumpet player. One more thing to add, to be more specific, is my ear is what has gotten me to a lot of hiring situations. Is what has been my prevailing. I can hear things very quickly and intuitively. I consider myself a pretty natural musician, an ear player, as they say, self-taught. So, having good ears has been, and the ability to know a lot of styles and how to stylistically adapt has been my ace in the hole as a freelance horn player.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, because for as much as someone can be a Swiss Army knife or, multi-pronged, ultimately there's going to be one thing usually that when someone needs that particular attribute or skill, they think of you.
Yeah. It's been ears, versatility, and tone and sound. Any freelance horn player, it's going to be your sound first and foremost. That are you moving molecules or are you not? And what kind of imprint are you leaving when you make your sound? You have a galvanizing tone that stirs something up in people, that conveys something just in the sound information alone, in the oral, info stream, not even considering the actual content that you're using that sound to play.
Right.
Sometimes certain artists have you at one note. For most people, it's vocalists. One MO of mine is to treat the horn like a vocal front and center solo instrument.
Right. You were speaking about the narrative aspect of the solo. Can you elaborate on that?
I strive to play, one of the chief goals of an improviser, especially in mainstream music where things are expected to be somewhat succinct. You're not playing 14-minute, 60s Coltrane solos. I strive to play improvised solos that sound thoughtful and through composed, as if the goal being as if I had composed them on paper before they happened. Mm-hmm. So that's the challenge of doing that across many different styles with many different musicians is a worthy challenge. And like trying to be a very refined improviser is a lifelong pursuit and a great brain game to play.
So it's kind of like, maybe this is analogous, maybe it isn't, but I remember when I was young, I thought that freestyle rapping was literally people thinking of those things in that exact moment. And then later learning, it's more like building a system or an algorithm of how to stitch together all this knowledge and style that they've developed beforehand.
Yeah, it's language and syntax, and that's exactly how it is. It's everybody has their pieces of language and their licks, so to speak.
Okay.
And their building blocks. Improvising note to note, that granular. I mean, does it happen? Yes, but oftentimes you surrender control and you sort of go where the language takes you. And usually that's in the form of maybe larger pieces of language and syntax, like one or two bars at a time that you string together to form like a solo narrative. Now you're also doing that on a structure of a chord progression, usually within a certain rhythmic style, within a certain tempo. So it's you within the context. I enjoy the ever shifting contextual canvas of where to place improvisations upon.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds it sounds like it avoids the problem that writing a hit song would entrench you in, which is now I have to keep playing this hit song over and over again. Yeah. That sounds like a nightmare to me.
Yeah. I've found being a lot of modern music production is that formulaic in terms of people using templates and just filling certain things in with a different top line or a different vocalist. But I have found it to be the most beneficial, just like Miles Davis did at Kind of Blue, to have the world's simplest sketches on a piece of paper or descriptive adjectives even, and just going into the studio and relying on the crucible of paying for studio time and being in a closed laboratory with a very basic sketch to come in, or very basic idea to then fractalize, to come in with something very simple and come out with a large amount of recorded material, which you then in post-production refine into something. You take those ingredients and you refine using the glory of the digital audio software power we have now to make some cuts, make some edits, make some splices, do some overdubs. But in my experience, long story short, going in with very simple sketches and minimal expectations has yielded recorded material that I was way more satisfied with than trying to dictate everything about a recording situation.
Right.
There's something about the studio, and this is why it's a shame to see so many studios go under, even though they're coming back. People are rediscovering the glory of the studio and the creative crucible that places you upon, especially when you're paying for the studio time. It's a limit. Time is limited.
That pressure.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than infinite time and infinite hard drive space to make something, because you'll never make a fucking thing.
Of course. Well, some people are better at the convergent aspect of art making, and those people tend to actually continue being artists. I think those who are really, really divergent, they tend to need the assistance of someone else. Like they're just kind of spewing out, vomiting out ideas that could work. They're better within systems, I think, like larger systems. But I think there are people, even given that constraint, that are just really good at saying, okay, this thing ends at this deadline. I need this to be done. And that's just people with different natures.
Yeah. We're a lot of us improvising musicians are addicts for those slivers of time when you reach greater heights than you thought you could, especially
Sure.
by catalyzing with other people. And hopefully it's captured. Usually, more often than not, it's not captured, and that's fine. Something amazing happens when you're galvanizing with a group of other musicians and you transcend. And oftentimes, we can be very self-critical. You sit down in the control room and listen to the takes of what you just recorded. More often than not, we're all very dark on what we just did. Nobody's exuberant. People are listening very critically.
True.
Critical for a few weeks, critical for a few days, and then something amazing happens, especially when you're listening to your own improvisations, where the mind is amazing at the rose-colored glasses thing. You whatever you feel you could have done in the moment is forgotten and melts away like clockwork. Mm-hmm. And you begin to shift to appreciating exactly what it is that's there. And then you find the glory in the beauty in what is there and what your interaction was with the other people, who's listening to who. Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to watch that ego window shift on yourself from above.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Happens in art as well. It's a really weird feeling.
So are there improvising artists? Is that a practice that people do in the process of school and coming up? And
I just thought of like the worst examples of artists, like these people who I don't even know, like they're hired for events and they paint a picture upside down and they're like doing graffiti and splattering it, and then they turn it and it's like the portrait of, I don't know, Bill Murray. Everyone's like, oh my Lord. There's obviously improvisational aspects for like the way I draw is I would consider improvisational. I don't sit down and go, I want to draw, unless I'm illustrating, because that's part of the job. I don't say I want to draw this and then I draw it. I follow the line and the form until it tells me what to draw. So that's not how everyone draws, but I think painters skew that way too, right? They're just kind of starting and pushing color around, and then the image starts to be discovered. I would consider that improvisational.
Yeah, there's definitely similarities there. I'm just watching a documentary on Sargent about when you zoom in, they're the broadest strokes, quite rough up close, but somehow creates more detail in the larger macrocosm from afar than if you had tried to micromanage every detail of the painting.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, certain mediums like paint are far less controllable than, for instance, I use a marker, like a very fine tipped marker. For me, I like that control, but I lose control in the content and the image itself. That's where I choose to lose that control. Does that make sense?
Yep. There are no solutions, only compromises. So, accepting the compromises.
I don't even know if it's a compromise. Just like something has to be stable and something has to be unstable for art to be interesting. And you can't have everything be unstable or vice versa. So it's just a complement, you know?
That's a good point. Yeah, there's definitely similarities between painting, drawing, visual art, and music. And the one thing that I'm sure there's group art I don't know about. The one thing that separates music apart, as I'm aware of, is there's something extremely unique and special about group improvisation, whether within a structure or with no structure. Something that the low overhead of creating something greater than yourself, getting in a room with a group of musicians who listen with wide open ears and low egos, and are just willing to selflessly, surrender together to the music. And that's always yielded. It's so interesting how they record it. If you happen to record that, how you can really capture a moment in time, in terms of like the larger composition, in terms of like how you can hear the micro interactions that people are having with each other and the way that people respond to other people. It's especially interesting when you have it on video too. But yeah,
I've had that. I used to play bass, and it was for a very brief period, but I do recall the ecstasy of that connection, and it would make me laugh. How do you respond to that moment? Do you smile? Do you laugh? Are you unshaken?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm pretty stoic in general, but unfortunately, you can't really smile while playing the trumpet at the same time. So that's a non-starter, because then you won't be able to produce a tone.
Right.
I like to play with like exuberant people and something childish and like joyful about it in a good way. Like the idea of shaping a solo and relying on people to do that, and then trading off and then supporting somebody else all in one short period of time. There's definite ecstasy in those. We're addicts for those. If you added up all the time in your life you were playing music and you actually feel like you transcended, it might be 5 minutes in an entire lifetime. But it's that short amount of that catalyzed transcendence with other people that keeps. That it's never something I'm becoming increasingly. All of my practice alone is just for utility of maintenance, of keeping my chops up strong. It's keeping my technical ability alive, but I get no kicks from playing by myself.
You mean so you can meet that moment?
Exactly. So you're not
right. Yeah.
You're not technically constrained when it comes to improvising in the moment, something you want to express between your brain, your fingers, your lips, connection.
Well, that is it's via the submission to the instrument or the utensil that you can even reach those places. Like if you aren't willing to submit to the trumpet or me to a pen, then there is no way you're ever going to get that feeling. If you don't completely go all in on that kind of thing.
Yeah. There's always going to be the hard limitations of your instrument and the way your body comes up against that instrument. But the best you can do is just put in the time. It's one great thing about playing a brass instrument is a very reliable input output system. You get out what you put in. You got to maintain a certain callus, so to speak, like a guitar player. On
your lip,
more or less. Yeah. If your shit gets too soft, you're donezo. You got to maintain a certain baseline of strength. I mean, 3 or 4 days off the instrument, and I'm starting to lose technical ability. And that can be very frustrating. But technical ability, endurance, tone quality, brass instruments are very unforgiving. So, I need to put in a certain amount of time a day or every week just to maintain what I already got, let alone get better.
Right. Well, to wrap it up, I'm going to ask you for recommendations based on the fact that, and I don't know if this is even technically jazz, but I like Sergio Mendes. Is there any jazz? Is that jazz, first off?
I'd say that's Brazilian pop music.
Okay.
We're
done then.
Played by traditional jazz instruments. 70s Brazilian music is absolutely my all-time favorite tape recording quality timbre of music. I absolutely love 70s music. I'll give you Brazilian music is incredible. It's a humongous, Brazilian jazz does exist, humongous can of worms. Check out, here's a record I've listened to. Manfredo Fest. The album is called Brazilian Dorian Dream.
Brazilian Dorian Dream.
And it's very indicative of the 70s Brazilian sound. You can also check out Hermeto Pascal. That is Brazilian jazz bordering on free jazz chaos sometimes. You can check out there's so much that happened in Brazil in the 60s, 70s, and you can check out Banda Black Rio. You can check out Lincoln Olivetti. There's so much. The recorded quality of music from the late 70s, my absolute favorite. From you're talking about, Marvin Gaye's "I Want You." You're talking about, Dionne Warwick, Bobby Womack, Isaac Hayes, "Hot Buttered Soul." The quality of the late 70s studio labels tape recordings is incredible.
Is it just warmer?
Yeah, you could say warm. It's just the way, the richness. Yeah, there's a lot of information in the recording, as well as the musicianship was great. They committed to the recording. They didn't have the editing fallback. So I think there's something special in the commitment to the performance. Listen to Thelonious Monk. Listen to John Coltrane. Listen to Duke Ellington. Listen to how hip Duke Ellington's big band compositions were from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Listen to Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker inventing bebop in the 40s. I promise you that stuff does not sound dated. Listen to Louis Armstrong, Hot 5 and 7s, and transport yourself back to 1929 when they were recording on a freaking wax cylinder, and imagine the vibrancy and exuberance in the room when they were all discovering hot jazz together. Check out 60s super celestial ass Coltrane. Listen to Miles Davis, "Kind of Blue," 1959. Listen to Bill Evans, live at the Village Vanguard, and how you hear early representation of like 360 live audio recording. We can hear every cough, every glass clinking, every hand piece of applause. That stuff, I promise you, does not sound dated.
All right, that's a good place to
there's
start.
A lot. Jazz.
And so if people want to see you live, when's the next time you're playing live?
Jazz is vast, my friend. I am at a club called Hearsay, playing modern house and Afro house music on Thursday nights. It's invite only. I am chock full of private events, which helps pay the bills and support the passion projects all throughout the spring and summer, all over the tri-state area. I hope to be in Switzerland later this summer for jazz festivals in either Montreux or Bern. And I am in the process of releasing my own jazz fusion project. So stay tuned for that. My band is called Demander.
Demander.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, you should come through, and we should set up that jazz fest.
I would love to see a jazz festival at Williams Center. Montclair has had success with theirs. I would love to see it be marketed in a cheeky way as an actual jazz festival. Because if you look at
I feel that.
You know what I mean? If you look at the lineup of Montreux, some of the biggest jazz festivals in the world, and you look at the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage, it's the Rolling Stones, it's
oh really?
Chaka Khan, it's MGM&T, it's the Police. So there's a lot of not jazz at jazz festivals. They're just using it as sort of a random descriptor at this point. So I think it would be funny. It would be a nice prod at the jazz festival industry to have a capital J actual jazz festival.
No, I feel that way about a lot of things. And I think we're in a position as an institution, a very fetal and vulnerable position, that we can only be authentic. That's all we can do. So I like that idea. Like we're about to have a film festival, and I think it's going to be an actual film festival.
There you go.
There's no big names that are making it relevant or something. It's just the local people making films. And
sure.
I relish those moments. I think when an institution gets too large, it has other issues and loses certain things and gains certain things. And I think that's an inevitable growth. So let's do an actual jazz festival while we can, you know?
Absolutely. There's no shortage of great artists in mind. I'd love to take my own project out for a spin, my own compositions, which would, bring that whole idea full circle, stepping out as a leader. And I'd love to work on the ground floor of the Williams. Are you guys executing certain growth objectives right now? You guys remodeling, growing? You guys having live shows? Like, what's?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, the bookstore record store has been a big help. We moved that in. I don't know if you were here when we moved that in, but yeah, everything's on the up and up, and we might get a liquor license in June. So
that's fantastic, man. I love the idea of the revitalization of a performing arts center in North Jersey, where there's historically been so much, and lately, cultural happenings outside of performing arts centers, outside of, I would just, to be succinct about it, I just say there's a lack of the art being taken to the street for common people in their own communities.
I'm sure.
And
yeah.
Love to see a revitalization of that in communities as vibrant and diverse as North Jersey, where we're both from. And so it's definitely a noble place as any to do that in this area.
Right on. So hit me up when you're free. And like I sent you, if you want to do one of those, like what's in my bag, just look through the record store, bookstore, pick some stuff out, and we can shoot a interview of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on. Music industry is complicated, but I believe in moving molecules. I think the live performance will prevail, and pour one out for the analog rebellion. I think it's coming. People try to keep their souls alive. I think we're actually going to see a resurgence in live performance.
Yeah, in humanity.
In the idea, keeping your soul together. In the world of frivolity, people are going to be seeking more meaningful. As long as we can keep the technocracy at bay, breathing down our
and the lips chapped.
Yeah, keep your lips
calloused.
Keep your lips calloused. Keep your fingers nimble. Keep your nose clean.
Okay.
Practice. Stay diligent. And I'll be by the Williams Center in no time, sometime soon. Thanks for having me on. It was nice chatting with you, Michael.
Same. Have a good day.
Goodbye.
Music by Dori Vivarsky and Mingja Chen. I actually don't know who's next. Let's see what happens. Have a good week.